Anguilla is our home. We've been here since the beginning. We are the only indigenous bank on the island. We are the pulse of our communities. We are the bank with a difference. Our commitment to building Anguilla means we value our relationships, friendships, homes, and businesses. Everything we do is done with care and expertise. We serve our people with integrity and pride, ensuring we transact with confidence. It's our passion to help our people and businesses succeed, making sure every Anguillian has the opportunity to flourish in a beautiful country we call our home. Welcome to the People's Bank. Welcome to the National Commercial Bank of Anguilla.
Good morning, listeners. Apologies for our late start this morning. We had some technical difficulties. I was hoping to be on the park to do this presentation at the vaccination site, but that did not work out, and so we had to basically do our setup within within the NCBA space. But just to indicate that we are happy, we are always happy to do such sessions. These sessions are part of our Securing Your Financial Future sessions that we normally run. This time we will not be personal, we will not be with you in person, but we will try our best to deliver the information that we have to deliver this morning through this medium. So this morning, as I mentioned, the seminar today will be on the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on our economy and finances. The session is very timely. We believe that developing or educating our community is critical during this time, just to ensure that persons understand the impact of the pandemic on our economy, the impact on our finances. And so that is why we think that it's important at this time to deliver such a presentation. So what we will discuss this morning, and so before I continue, let me just introduce myself to persons that do not know me. I'm Charmaine Francois, the CEO of NCBA. NCBA, you know, we've just celebrated our 5th anniversary, 5 years of existence. Just a minute. Yeah, 5 years of existence. And we want to thank our community, our clients, the Anguillian community for their continued support over the last, support over the last 5 years. And so this morning we will be discussing quite a few topics around the pandemic. We will look at the global impact of the pandemic, the regional impact, particularly the Eastern Caribbean, our local impact, and looking at the economy, our economy, Anguilla. We will speak to the impact on our business enterprises, the impact on our individuals and household. We will also be giving you some survival tips, both for individuals and businesses, and we're going to discuss the way forward. So just to speak on what has been the COVID-19 impact thus far, the global prospects remain quite uncertain. It's 14 months into the pandemic. For us, it's in our parts, I mean, really, the pandemic really hit home in March of 2020. For other parts of the world, that it would be a year and about 5 months. And so there's still a lot of uncertainty around the COVID-19 pandemic. When will it end? There's no answer to that. The COVID-19 pandemic has not only caused a public health crisis, but it has gravely affected our livelihood. According to the WHO, approximately half of the world's 3.3 billion global workforce, are at risk of losing their livelihoods. And that's how significant that pandemic is on our livelihood. From the first report of the cluster of pneumonia cases in China in December of 2019, the COVID-19 pandemic has led to over 162 million reported cases thus far, and over 3.3 million deaths globally since the start of the pandemic. The pandemic is known to be the largest, has caused the largest global contraction since the Great Depression of 1929. So just to speak a little more on the global impact, when we analyze the gross domestic product, which is the broadest measure of economic activity, and that's really looking at the goods, produce, and services provided within a country over a period of a year, that has shrunk at unprecedented levels, according to the World Bank. So if, for instance, in the US, the second quarter, which was the quarter April to June of 2020, we saw the US GDP contracting 33%, both in terms of retailers closing doors and restaurants, and the desperate need to control the spread of the virus. That 33% represented 4 times the contraction experienced during the Great Depression. In 2020, we also saw the global GDP, and at a global level, plunge at a pace of 3 times bigger than that of the global financial crisis of 2008-2009. So the impact of the pandemic has been severe. This slide, I'm not sure if you've seen that particular slide, but it shows the impact of the pandemic on our global economy. If you look at the pink areas, you would see these are the countries in recession. So when you look at across the globe, looking at about 5 continents, you would see the recession in those major continents. And when we say recession, we speak into contraction in GDP for all those major markets. US at 9% by the second quarter of 2020. You have Canada at 12% at contraction. You have UK at 20. And the numbers basically reflected right across. The only positive growth we're seeing is China. By second quarter, China would have recovered from the pandemic, showing a positive GDP growth of around 12%. All the other areas right across the globe, we're seeing that contraction or basically moving into recession in terms of the yellow areas. So based on the most recent update from the IMF, and again, it's important that we keep up to date with what is happening around us globally in terms of the global numbers. The global economic growth is projected to increase. So we see a positive upward movement of 6% for 2021, moderating to 4.4% by 2022. Now the projections for for year 21 and 22 is strongly based on the economy's rebounding, yeah? And so a lot of that is dependent on the anticipated vaccine-powered recovery by the second half of 2021. So the outlook depends, as I said, it's really dependent on the vaccine, the battle between the vaccine and the virus, the effectiveness of our economic policies, and the evolution of financial conditions of affected sectors and households. Our smaller regions, and for us, we are more heavily dependent on tourism. Those sectors would experience even more severe impact due to the pandemic. And we see it and we look at the numbers as we go through the presentation. Again, speaking to the global impact, among advanced economies, like for instance the US, is expected to surpass its pre-COVID GDP numbers, that 2021 in 21, and return to pre-COVID levels by 2022. So we can see the positive movement based on, we can see for the US is right now at 40% vaccination levels. So 40% of the population have received at least the first dose of vaccines. And a lot of that growth is dependent on the vaccination success. Among emerging markets and developing economies, China had already returned to pre-COVID GDP levels by the second half of 2020, whereas the others in those markets are expected to rebound by 2023. Significant decline is anticipated in terms of our living standards compared to pre-pandemic expectations. The pandemic has reversed gains in poverty reduction. So what we've seen is that an additional 95 million people are expected to basically have moved to extreme poverty in 2020, and 80 million more undernourished than before. So that has been the impact to date. And so if we do not reverse that trend, these numbers can increase significantly. So 95 million people have entered the ranks of extreme poverty in 2020. Unemployment rates have also risen by 1.5 percentage points above pre-pandemic averages, and that's again on a global level. The situation, and we'll speak to the situation for Anguilla, and as we go through the presentation. The employment and earnings impact of the pandemic has been highly unequal across groups of workers. And so what the research is showing in terms of the latest IMF research, the young adults, women, and the relatively low-skill employees have been hit the hardest by the pandemic. And so there's a lot of data and statistics around that, information. So if we move from the global, in terms of what is happening on a global scale, and we move now to the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, which really comprise of the our 8 islands. The COVID impact, again, assessing the GDP growth rate, which is a good indicator of how well a country is doing. So if we look at for the ECCU, over the period of 2017 right down to 2021, we've seen positive growth rates for 2017, 18, 19, and in 2020, as a result of the pandemic, that has dipped to a negative region of approximately 14% contraction for 2020, and that's as a region, the ECCU region. The projections for 2021 is roughly around 3%, but that number will be derailed, or may be derailed, by the impact of the volcano in St. Vincent, and even the recent shutdowns across the region. That number would be impacted by those. Again, the numbers, those numbers are coming out of the ECCB. So as we get updated numbers, we will communicate that. Debt to GDP, which is another important indicator. What we're seeing here is that from 2016 right up to 2020, we had very moderate levels of GDP, notwithstanding. We have, when you look at for 2019, where debt to GDP was at 67% in 2019, again above the prudential benchmark of 60%. But in 2020, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, our debt levels for our region have moved up to 86%, roughly to 86% in 2020. And so that is an area that we have to look closely at as we plan ahead. The pandemic, we can see, both in terms of our economic activity, in terms of GDP growth, and also in terms of our debt levels have increased significantly as a result of the pandemic. Let us move now to Anguilla, looking at our economy. Anguilla has gone through, we know that Anguilla over the last, I would say, a little over 10 years, again coming out of the global financial crisis in 2008, that crisis resulted in a fiscal crisis for Anguilla in 2019, and that amounted to 10% of our GDP. Anguilla economy also faced the banking crisis during the period of 2013 to 2016, resulting in a banking resolution costing the Anguilla economy 45% of GDP, approximately 45% of GDP. In 2017, a year after that, we were faced with Hurricane Irma. That resulted in significant damages and losses to an estimated value of 100% of GDP. And 3 years down, we now have the COVID-19 global pandemic. That too is causing significant impact. And if we look at just our 2020 GDP numbers, we're seeing a contraction of 27% of GDP as a result, in 2020, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So Anguilla has faced quite a bit of shocks over the last few years. And it's important that those shocks are managed to ensure sustainable growth, going forward. Now, just again to speak to the last 5 years, what we just spoke to, 2017, that's coming out of Hurricane Irma. 2018, we had positive growth. 2019, positive growth. And in 2020, a huge dip of 27% as a result of the pandemic. The ECCB is projecting a growth rate, a positive growth rate or expansion of about 11% for 2021. That may be derailed due to the lower recovery or slower recovery in the tourism sector, and also the recent lockdown that we just had would have implications for our GDP numbers. So again, looking at the 2020 impact of the pandemic on Anguilla, as I mentioned before, the Anguilla real GDP growth contracted by 27%. So what that means is that when you look at the value of the goods and services, goods produced, services provided, that the value of that decline, which is really what speaks to economic activity, that declined by 27% in 2020. The benchmark for economic growth for the region is at a 5% prudential benchmark. We have operated way below that. For 2021, as I said, the projection looks optimistic at 11%. But we can see in terms of the impact of the current lockdown, that will definitely impact. Also, the slow recovery of the tourism sector will also impact that growth. The total value of 2020 economic activity, that is our nominal GDP in terms of value, declined from 1,025 million in 2019 to 704 million in 2020. That's a 31% decline in nominal terms. That is not factoring inflation. Our main economic sector, which is our tourism sector, hotel and restaurant, experienced a significant decline of an estimated 70% in 2020 over that of 2021. We had a very good year in 2019, and the projections were very good for 2020 up to the first few months of 2020. But with the pandemic, that reversal happened, and that reduction is estimated at around 70%. In addition to negatively impacting other related sectors. And so not just the tourism, hotel, and restaurant, but sectors like rentals, auto rentals, villa rentals, etc., also impacted as a result of that, the closure of the sector. The tourism sector, we closed our borders in about March of 2020 and reopened on the 1st of November. So that period of closure impacted significantly on our tourism revenues and tourism activity. So Anguilla global market has been heavily impacted as a result. A lot of our, in terms of our labor force, is centered around, if it's not the public sector, is the tourism sector. And so you have, based on the latest numbers from our labor department, based on those numbers, it's about approximate 2,500 persons have been unemployed and or underemployed, representing 37% of our labor force. And that is from the onset of the pandemic. 2,500 persons are either unemployed or underemployed. 37% of our labor force. And that is a significant number. And so that 2,500 would have implications for families. So there is a multiplier effect. So it's not just 2,005. These persons some of them are principal breadwinners and have to support their families. So the impact is very, very wide. If we move a little to speak to the debt to GDP numbers for Anguilla, in 2019, our debt levels were at 48%. 48% in 2019. That debt to GDP ratio increased to 63%, a small increase over the benchmark of 60%. So at 63% in 2020 due to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. The main contributing sectors, if we look at this slide, which tells you a very good story of or really speaks to the impact of the pandemic. Our main sectors have been affected. And those sectors include the key sector being hotel and restaurants. Again, looking at in terms of looking at in our GDP growth rate by economic activity, retail and wholesale and retail trade declined by 43% in 2020. So that 27% contraction we spoke to, the contributing sectors to that are those sectors that we are going to speak to. Hotel and restaurant, a 74% reduction or contraction. We have, in terms of transport, storage, and communication, the key areas under that sector would be air and sea transport, contracting by 74%. We also have, in terms of real estate, rental, and business activities under that sector. The significant area here is renting of machinery and equipment. And this is really where we capture our auto rentals, etc. The rental business contracting by 76%, sorry. So these are significant movements in those various sectors, again affecting our business community, because these numbers reflect the activities within our commercial enterprise. 2021, we're looking at some positive growth. Again, those are projected growth, which is heavily dependent on some rebound in terms of economic rebound. The wholesale and trade, retail trade, looking at a positive growth of 12%. We are looking at a positive growth in the hotel and restaurant of 60%. Again, that's the projected growth. But those numbers will be heavily impacted by lockdowns, like we had border closures, etc. Transport in terms of air and sea, by a 60% expansion we are projecting, and real estate renting, an upward movement in terms of renting of 60%. But as again, the caveat here is all of that is dependent on the economy rebounding, the economic recovery. And with the recent lockdown and country and the closure of the borders, the impact of that will definitely have implications for those projections that we just spoke to. The key sectors affected by COVID, again, just to drill down a little, looking at historically what has happened to our top sectors. In 2019, we had a very good tourism year. The hotel and restaurant contributed to $251 million in terms of contribution to GDP. That represented about 29% of GDP. Real estate was the second largest sector, contributing $98 million to GDP, representing around 11%. Then you had public admin, defense, social security contributing 8% at 74 million. Wholesale and retail trade contributing a similar 8% at 74 million, sorry. And then the construction sector being the fifth largest sector at 58 million, contributing to around 7% of GDP. By 2020, we can see the numbers have reversed because of the pandemic. Real estate, if you look at our top sector, which is tourism, moved from first place to fourth place. Tourism moved from a contributing factor of 29% to 11%, with receipts reducing from 251 million to 78 million in receipts for. Again, what we've seen in terms of the movement from 2019 to 2020, we saw a 5% dip in real estate, rental, and business activities. We also saw a 1% reduction in public admin, but the greatest reduction is really in the tourism, hotel, and restaurant at roughly 70% decline over that of 2019. Construction, again, contracting at 17%. The projections for 2021, we anticipate that the hotel and tourism, again, will take first place, contributing to 19%, not at pre-COVID levels, but at 19% in 2021, with receipts totaling 163 million in terms of contribution to GDP. Again, not at pre-COVID level. In 2019, it was 251 million. Real estate maintaining 2020 levels at 13%. Public admin, no movement here. And then financial mediation, just a small expansion. And then wholesale and retail trade contracting by around 7%. So in a nutshell, what we project in is the key sector rebounding, which is our hotel and restaurant sector, which is tourism, at 109% increase over that of 2020. All of that is dependent on the reopening of our borders, reopening of the sector. And so we'll speak to, what are some, how do we get that sector to rebound? How do we get our economy to rebound? And so that is, again, to just share with you the severity of the pandemic, what the pandemic means in terms of dollars and cents on our economy. Again, let us drill down further on our tourism numbers. That has dropped significantly as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Again, that data is coming from the Central Bank, Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. We can see what I've given here is the last 5 years, from 2016 right down to 2020, and we can see what has happened. Even after Irma, Hurricane Irma, our numbers moved from, there was a significant dip in our tourism numbers in terms of arrivals. The visitor numbers moved in 2017 from 49,000, to 87,000 in 2018, and that's following Irma. In 2019, we saw an expansion that those numbers literally, doubled, almost doubled to 166 million. It's not million, I guess for me, I speak a lot of millions of dollars, but that's 166,000. And what we see in that 166,000 in terms of visitor numbers, that has come down to 41,000 in 2020. So an unprecedented dip of 75% over 2019 numbers. So 75% of our visitors, tourism numbers dropped as a result of the pandemic. Notable is the 53% over 2018 numbers following the passage. So even when we thought Hurricane Irma was devastating, the pandemic has resulted, we've achieved less than half of what we achieved following Hurricane Irma in terms of tourism numbers. So the impact of the pandemic is severe. 2021 impact of COVID-19 pandemic. So the ECCB is projecting a recovery of approximately 11% for Anguilla for 2021. Again, the projections will be affected by the recent lockdown or pause in economic activity. Our tourism product has not rebounded. And so those numbers, I would expect when, in the next couple weeks and months, that those numbers will be, the growth number will be revised. The key economic sectors will also be negatively impacted due to the recent lockdown and country border closure. Economic success is highly dependent on the vaccination program. Economic success in Anguilla and across the globe is highly dependent on vaccination. So we will come back to the topic of vaccination later on in my presentation, but let us speak to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our finances. Again, to basically summarize, we are seeing what has happened. 2,500 employees have been displaced, unemployed or underemployed, representing about 37% of our labor force. We've seen a significant, the cash flows from our individuals and businesses alike have been impacted significantly. As a financial institution, a lot of our the sectors, those businesses that operate in the sectors, they lodge their deposits. Their cash flows, revenues come through the bank. And we can see and monitor the trends. There is a higher dependency on government financial support. Right now, households and individuals are highly dependent on that financial support given by the government of Anguilla. We also see a high dependency on financial relief programs offered by banks, and we'll speak to the moratorium relief that has been offered to both retail and commercial enterprises. There is a high dependency on overdraft lines and lines of credit by our commercial enterprises, again, to ensure that there's business continuity. There's also high support for ADB loans, and to provide that required financial support to small, medium-priced enterprises. Retail savings significantly depleted by the unemployed and underemployed population. So persons are now moving and living on their savings. And we've seen that reflected in terms of our deposit numbers, our saving deposit numbers, both savings and CDs. Business operating cash flows reflect significant decline, and what we've seen is decline in the region of 50 to as high as 90% of businesses' revenues are affected as a result of the pandemic. And again, it depends, that range depends on the sector in which the business operates. The moratorium impact on individuals and businesses' finances is significant. And from what we just spoke to, we can assess the level of that impact. Just to speak to the moratorium that has been offered, that moratorium support, in as early as March of 2020, the banks, through our central bank, extended the moratorium support to COVID-19 affected persons and businesses. So that support started from March 2020 and continues until September 30th of 2021. So at the end of that moratorium, that would represent 18 months into a moratorium. Loan moratoriums are financial relief offered to both individuals and commercial entities affected by the pandemic. So it's really a temporary relief measure granted to customers for a specific period of time. It's not indefinite. And so based on the current timeline, the moratorium will end in September of 2021. We have some customers that have been on moratorium from March last year to current, so that's over 12 months. And persons continuing to write to September. We have persons that have came off the moratorium a few months ago, but with the recent lockdown, they've asked for to come on the moratorium support. So the extent of that is significant. So during the period of the moratorium, we have just to ensure that persons understand a moratorium the interest does not stop. The interest continues to accrue daily at the interest rate, the loan interest rate. So what the moratorium is really to provide support to you. You are not employed, you're not earning, so you do not have to make your monthly payments. So the monthly payments are deferred, so they're deferral in terms of monthly payments, but the interest accumulates. And that interest at the end of the moratorium period is then capitalized, and so that's where the restructuring of loans take place. So it's important that persons on moratorium understand that the interest is there, it accumulates daily, and at the end, that interest would then be capitalized once the financial situation of the borrower improves. Your bank, in terms of NCBA, have offered moratorium support in the region of $86 million. That number used to be closer to 100 million. We've seen movement downward with the reopening of the sector. Some persons had regained employment, but we're now seeing that the numbers increasing again because of the recent shutdown of the sector, of the primary sector. So just to give you an idea of what are some of the key sectors that are affected, the primary sectors or customers within those sectors that are affected. I highlighted here the private households. Out of the 86 million that we offered in moratorium, 34 million represents households. So these are households that have been displaced as a result of unemployment or underemployment. And that represents 39% of the moratoriums offered. We have the construction and land development sector, which are customers within that sector, totaling around 16 million or 18% of the moratorium support that was provided. The other large percentage is the tourism and resort, which is 14% of that, and that represents more on the commercial end, commercial enterprise moratorium support of 14 million or 17% of the portfolio. The private, just to speak to again, the private households here are persons employed in any sector, but those represent primarily individuals and households. I'll also speak to professional, scientific, and technical services representing 11%, which is roughly around another 10 million. But this shows you the gravity of the situation. 86% of our portfolio are persons represent persons that are not able to make loan payments because, as I said, they're either unemployed or they are underemployed. And so at the end of come September 30th, those persons would have to regain employment because the moratorium comes to an end. So come October, loan payments would need to restart. And so what that would mean is that persons would need to be gainfully employed in order to restart repaying their loans. So what is at stake here? The ECCU region has offered moratorium support to a value of $2.7 billion. So we are a small percentage of that, 86 million out of that. But as a region, the Eastern Caribbean region, 2.7 billion the banks have offered in moratorium support to individuals, families, and businesses affected by the pandemic. Moratorium support, as I indicated, has basically 4 months left, ending at the end of September of 2021. Post-moratoriums, if loans are not restructured, noting borrowers would have to, borrowers' situation would have to improve, these loans would drift into non-performing status. When I say non-performing status, the loans will become bad loans. Now, the results of bad loans, have huge, very huge implications for the region financial sector. Noting, for instance, for Anguilla, our situation is more severe. Our non-performing loans ratio is the highest in the region at around 25%. The region being roughly at around between 10 and 11%. So for Anguilla, the moratorium support that is given, if there is not a recovery in terms of economic recovery, those persons regaining employment, then that have severe implications for our financial sector. So those numbers I spoke to here, 86 million, only speaks to NCBA. But you also have another commercial bank operating locally, which is Republic Bank, who would have offered moratorium support. And so it's important to understand that the implications of bad loans would mean to ensure the survival of the financial sector, the banks would have to foreclose on those properties. One of the primary responsibility of a commercial bank is protection of depositors' funds. And so as we operate, we continue to assess the impact of the pandemic. We have been, we've been supportive as commercial banks to provide the necessary relief. The expectation was that the pandemic would have been behind us by September of 2021. But here we are, 4 months left to September 2021, and the pandemic, there's still, a lot of uncertainty. So it's important that persons understand the implications of this pandemic just, looming around. We have to put the COVID-19 pandemic to, bring it to an end. We need to jumpstart our economy in order for those displaced employees to regain employment so that loan payments can restart. If that does not happen, then there are huge implications. We'll have persons like we already have. When I speak to the NCBA context, we do have a large level of non-performing loans currently. And we've been managing and working with customers during our 5 year of existence. It will reach a point where we will have no choice than to do those foreclosures because to ensure the survival of the bank, if the pandemic is allowed to just continue without an end in sight. So the situation is a grave situation. Households are at risk, families are at risk of losing their properties if the economy does not restart. That's how serious this matter is. And so, again, I stress a little bit on that area because as a financial institution, we understand the implications of moratoriums. As much as over the last few months, without having to make loan payments, a lot of families were able to survive that pandemic. But as I said, the moratorium will come to an end. Just to mention, we have been discussing at the ECCU bankers level whether there is a need to further extend, but that is a matter for the regulator. So we, as a country, we have to do what we have to do to ensure the survival of our economy, the survival of our people, through these difficult times. So in summary, Anguilla COVID-19 impact is significant, even more significant than our sister islands. 14 months into the pandemic, the current model of country lockdowns, border closures, entry restrictions, lengthy quarantine requirements, etc., is not a sustainable model. We cannot move into the future with that model. This is not a model that can work going forward. The COVID-19 pandemic continues to have a major impact on our livelihood, the livelihood of the people of Anguilla, our families, our children, even planning for our children's education. I look at my 2 young children and planning for their future. How do you plan with all that uncertainty? Providing for the basic necessities of life is at risk for many of us. So think of that 2,500 and more persons that are unemployed today. How are they providing for their families? Can they provide on $1,000 monthly? We have to think, look at the bigger picture. Businesses' cash flows are at its lowest ever, particularly the non-essential businesses, and tourism and related enterprises in particular. Business failures are nearing. We've been working with a lot of our commercial customers to ensure we keep them afloat during this time. But for how long? The cash flows for many of those businesses have declined significantly, as high as 90% of revenues have disappeared because of no activity. Government revenues continue to be heavily impacted by the continued lockdowns and closure of borders. Recurring revenue projections for 2021 and beyond is at risk. I mean, how do you continue to plan and budget with that level of uncertainty? Will the UK government continue to support or subsidize our pandemic-induced costs indefinitely? These are the questions we need to ask. This is a global pandemic. The pressures are felt globally. Will the UK government continue to support the cost of our border control, the cost of subsidizing, the shortfall in our budgets because of our receipts are not coming through, revenue receipts are falling. So just to speak to the impact on young adults, the COVID-19 impact, the information is out there. There's a lot of research and surveys that are being conducted now by the U.S. Census Bureau, the SHRM survey, which is an HR platform entity that conducts quite a bit of surveys. You can read the data, and we can see what is happening around us. There is higher percentage of job losses in the young generation, the young adults, than older workers. So the ages 18 to 44 years are at higher risk, reflective of the increase in unemployment numbers and the halt in new hiring. I mean, a lot of the business community have basically halted hiring because, again, the cash flows are not there to support new hiring. And that represents a critical section of the population. You have, for instance, a lot of persons graduating annually from secondary school, from tertiary education, tertiary school. And where are the jobs? In the current environment, that will only create unnecessary stress, depression, mental health issues for our youth. A majority of our young people are moving back to their parents' home. Those persons that are unemployed right now, unable to pay their rent. This is now 14 months into the pandemic. A landlord would not be as patient as 2 months into the pandemic. So we've seen young adults are now moving back to their parents' home, giving up their apartments because of the increased loss of employment. We are seeing university and college enrollments declining for particularly the undergraduate levels. We are also seeing high levels of anxiety and depression among our young adults. So it's important the young persons invest in your future. Investing in your future means making the right decision today to restart that economy, to bring back jobs, to bring back opportunities. So it's important that the youth take note of what is happening. The pandemic impact on our way of life. So with the shutdown of borders and lockdowns of entire countries, and all of that is as a result of the pandemic, we have seen a change in how we operate. We are unable to spend time with our loved ones, our families. When there's a lockdown, you're unable to move. You're unable to visit families that are sick at hospitals. We are unable to travel as we used to for leisure and for fun. Important life events, we are missing a lot of that. I was saying that, it's now many years that I'm missing very important milestones, family milestones, birthdays, weddings, funerals, etc. Our way of life in terms of hugging, handshakes, we now have to do the elbow knock. We have to do the foot knocks. We no more huggings, wearing of masks. Do we want to wear masks for the rest of our lives? So our mental health is an important issue that we must manage during these times. Let us move and speak a little bit about some key survival strategies. So all of what we've just shared here, we want to now give you some strategies to survive. And some of that we've been sharing with our many clients, and we saw it fit to basically give some tips that one can, or strategies one can use during these unprecedented times. For survival today, organizations, businesses require strong leadership, strong management in order to make sound decisions. We have to be making sound decisions in terms of capital spend decisions, expansion decisions. Do we consolidate? Do we expand? So we need strong leadership during these times. Companies need to focus on developing their pandemic response plans. I mean, this pandemic, for most of us, we had business continuity plans. But for all of our plans, it did not cover pandemics. I mean, we had, as a bank, we had to expand our business continuity plan to include pandemics. So it's important that you develop that response plan. The response has to cater for your employees. It has to cater for your customers and other stakeholders, and more importantly, the business continuity as a whole. Establish strong risk management framework to safeguard the well-being of your employees, your clients, and key stakeholders. Now, the key considerations in developing a solid or strong risk management framework is to look at considerations in terms of prevention, detection. How do you detect? How do you respond? And how do you mitigate? These are the questions we need to answer. We need to identify what are our top risks facing the business, and how do we mitigate against those risks. We need to cut expenses in light of contracting revenues. I've looked at some financial statements, and we see revenues are declining, but you have our costs increasing. If your revenues are contracting, your cost should not be increasing. So we have to look at ways of cutting expenses. Only essential spend, consolidation, exploring economies of scale, purchasing options. Where am I purchasing from? Are there other options, cheaper options? Renegotiate your contractual arrangements. You may have contractual arrangements years in the making, so you may want to relook at those arrangements. Reassess revenue areas or cash flows from supply chain. So reassess your revenue streams. Explore the most effective approach to service delivery. For instance, digital payments. If based on the business that you're in, you may want to look at digitalizing a lot of your payment platforms. And overall improvement in your digital presence. So a lot of the focus, again, being innovative during this period. Closely monitor capital spend during these times. Pad your balance sheet with cash rather than use up cash for long-term spend. So capital spend, you'd have to analyze that spend, whether that's the right timing to do that spend, whether that's the right time to take on long-term debt. Look at your leverage ratios. Analyze, your debt cover ratios. What is happening to your operating cash flows? Can your cash flow support your capital spend? Work closely with your bank. Your bank is here to assist. NCBA is the people's bank. We, as I mentioned, at several forums that we are market leader in all sectors. We would like more collaboration with our clients. What we've started doing from the onset of the pandemic and even through into this financial period, we've started to meet one-on-one with our commercial customers, particularly to basically do a sit down and an assessment of what is happening. To get a gauge of what is happening with the business, how can we assist to help the businesses survive during this period. So work with your bank, explore moratorium support if required. Lines of credit, we have extended a few lines of credit to ensure that the survival of the entities during these times. Wherever possible, set up home office and enable your employees to actively work from home. That can reduce your operating costs. Assess the impact of the pandemic on your business from the operational and financial perspectives. So by conducting stress testing, and that's a critical time, to analyze the impact or the potential impact of the pandemic on the business. Assessing the viability of the business, looking at various scenarios. It's important to do that during these times. So stress testing is a critical analysis that basically, in terms of being proactive and forward planning. These are some of the tips or strategies that we leave with you in terms of our commercial clients. In terms of individuals, we will, some survival strategies that we always put forward to our retail clients, our individuals and households. Always stay afloat during these crises, and so that is in terms of how do you do that? How do you stay afloat? Create an emergency or survival budget. During this time, we need to move away from our normal budget and create that survival budget. Where can I cut and shave in order to allow me to build some kind of safety net to support the extent of the pandemic? So focus on your basic needs and financial responsibilities. Separate your wants from your needs. So that is to remove unessential spending and focus on what is essential to your survival and the survival of your families. Establish an emergency saving fund. And that saving fund, no matter how small, if you can shave some of your expenditure, you can actually start to build that savings fund. And these are crucial. Again, no matter how small, you can build those savings plans. The banks, for instance, NCBA, we have several very small plans or accounts, like the Gold Savings Plan that we have offered to the Ministry of Health as part of this Vax AXA campaign. That is an excellent product where you make monthly small payments for a period of a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, in order to build that wealth that you need to build, that safety net, that emergency fund that you need to build. Start building that cash reserve, and it takes just a little. The rule of thumb is 10%. Between 5 and 10, minimum of your income, you should be putting aside monthly as we earn income. Continue to explore cost-cutting measures for our home gardening, eating out less. So we do a little more cooking at home. We do a little more home care. Again, the pandemic has forced us to do a lot of that. I too have been caught trying to do my own, shaping of my eyebrows, do little things to, again, by force, maybe not by choice, but those little things, those little savings can help you can go towards building that emergency fund. Apply for a moratorium on payments only if required. So if you are working, please, you should not be on a moratorium because you earn an income. If you are not working or you may have families that are displaced and you are assisting them, then a moratorium may be applicable or is applicable. So moratorium if required. And if you are on moratorium and you are able to make payments, if your situation improves, we would like to see more persons coming forward if once your situation improves to start to make at least your interest payments. So these are some of the basic strategies. Even one of the key things too in terms of financial decisions, major financial decisions, if you're making, for instance, a decision to build your home today, we need to analyze that decision carefully. And one of the things that we always tell persons, come to your bank first. What we are seeing a lot of times persons are coming with, to us after the fact. They've gone to an architect, they've got the plan approved, and they now come into the bank with that approved plan. And when we do the analysis, the income cannot support. The starting point towards making that huge financial decision is by first assessing what your income can afford comfortably with a mortgage. One should focus on modest living today because there's too much uncertainty ahead. What we see in persons are maxing out their debt cover in just a mortgage, not factoring what comes with a mortgage. Owning a home, there is maintenance, there is property taxes, there's annual insurance for that property. So all of those factors, you have your life insurance to secure that loan. So there are a lot of costs relating to owning a home and not just getting that loan and having that house. So it's important that when your bank gives you the advice on resizing that house, take the advice. Please take the advice. It's important that we make the right decisions as individuals because those decisions have long-term implications for you. The answer to our current challenges is vaccination. So all of those strategies, all of those tips are important. But the answer to our bigger issue in terms of jump-starting that economy, bringing back economic activity requires a bigger response, and that response is vaccination. Economic recovery for Anguilla and the region is highly dependent on the success of the vaccination rollout, achieving herd immunity. That's a real thing. Vaccine is achieving virus immunity, making sure that we have a large percentage of our population that are vaccinated is critical to taking us out of this pandemic. Herd immunity occurs when a large portion of the community becomes immune to a disease, making it spread from person to person unlikely or minimal. Now, I'm not going to speak on the science of vaccine. I'm not a medical doctor. But I can speak to the impact of the pandemic, and I can speak to the global response. Globally, countries are moving in that direction. The economists, analysts, the large organizations, everyone is, when you look at all the information, it is pushing towards vaccination as the end to the pandemic. Vaccination is the global response to the pandemic. It is not an Anguilla response. It's not Anguilla wanting to push vaccination. It is a world response to ending this pandemic. Deploying vaccines globally to save lives. That is the focus. And we'll speak to some of the efforts that are being pushed towards that global push for vaccination. The science is clear. We need to read the right research. The science is clear on the vaccines. The global response as of May 17th, the US, the president, I've just read, the president of the United States reaffirmed the US commitment to leading the international and coordinated vaccination effort geared at ending the pandemic. And so as part of that, they will be donating 80 million in vaccines by the end of June, and that is globally. Other bodies working diligently to end the pandemic and ensure vaccines are distributed in an equitable way across the world. The G7, EU, COVAX, WHO, etc. So quite a bit of regional international bodies are pushing the mandate. Focus on saving lives, stopping the spread of COVID-19, reduce the lifespan of this pandemic, and recover economically is the focus. And that's the global focus. We are fortunate in Anguilla. If we look at this chart here, the vaccination gaps across the world. There are countries even close to home that don't have vaccines. I mean, we have vaccines for all eligible persons. The UK have provided us with vaccines. Look at this chart here, where at the end of April of 2021, most of the world regions have under 10%. They don't have enough vaccines to vaccinate their population. But Anguilla, we have 100% of vaccines. We have enough to vaccinate our population. We are fortunate. Other countries around the world, look at what's happening in India. They would love to be, to receive more vaccine. I mean, the populations are a lot larger. We are fortunate to have a small population where we can correct this situation or control this situation. So let us move forward and make that step to get us to the stage of herd immunity. Currently, based on the last set of numbers that I think was the 2021, the numbers may have moved closer to 9,000, but 8,850 roughly persons vaccinated in terms of first dose. Our target for Anguilla is 12,600. We had 70% of our target, and I must thank every one of those 8,800 and a little over 8,800 persons that have come forward and that has taken that step towards economic recovery for Anguilla, for our people. But we have a little way to go. We have 30% of that target to still achieve. And so we need more hands on deck. As a region, Anguilla has been leading the way. Our government, our Ministry of Health have done a fantastic job in pushing the vaccination drive. I mean, every morning I listen to the different medical professionals that they bring on board to educate us on the vaccines. And so that has reaped quite a bit of benefits, and we can see we are leading at 59% of our population have gotten the first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. You have, for instance, my home country, which is St. Lucia, is at just 15%. We don't have, as a country, St. Lucia does not have enough vaccines to vaccinate the persons that want to be vaccinated. You have other islands like Grenada at 15%, St. Vincent at 16%. So they're very small uptake. Even Montserrat, that has vaccines for all of the small population of about a little over 4,000, is only at 27%. So it speaks volume for the people of Anguilla. We have done the right thing. So at 59%, we have, some way to go. So we want to bring on board the others to come on board, to register for the vaccines, because all the numbers, all the research shows that to end this pandemic, the way to end this pandemic is through vaccination. Opportunities ahead. Foremost is overcoming the immediate public health crisis. We must control the spread of that of the COVID-19. To the opportunities ahead, jumpstart our tourism sector. If we are able to achieve our target herd immunity by end of the third quarter, I'm hoping earlier, of 2021, we are poised for a rebound to pre-pandemic levels by as early as 2023, in terms of primarily our key sector, the tourism and hotel sector. Expand our tourism market into untapped markets, both in terms of demographics and geographic. We do not want to lose out. We have to move fast. We have countries that have reopened, countries that are open for tourism already without restrictions, without the quarantine restrictions. So as of May 23rd, 2020, we have, for instance, quite a few countries very close to home: Antigua, Bahamas, Aruba, Belize, Curacao, DR, Grenada, and the list continues, that are open for tourism. The tourism market is open without restrictions. We need to get Anguilla. I mean, we have the target date of 1st of July. Let us push forward on vaccination. Get our vaccination numbers up so we can meet that target date. We do not want to lose out on those opportunities. Positively affect the other key related sectors: real estate rentals, auto rentals, restaurants, air and sea transport. All those sectors will rebound with the reopening of our primary sector. Improve employment numbers. Once the sector reopen, we will see those 2,000 or displaced persons regaining employment. And the overall financial situation of our individuals, our families, our businesses alike will improve. Because all those persons are sitting, waiting for the tourism sector to reopen. And once the sector reopens, we will see our employment numbers improving. It will also improve government's revenues and provide needed funds to divert in other developing sectors. We speak about diversification, but how do you diversify if there's no revenues? So we can diversify into the refishing, green energy, etc. once we can rebound, get the economy to rebound, get our receipts, our revenue receipts to increase, to go back to pre-pandemic levels so that we can start to innovate. NCBA supports vaccination, and that is why we support it not blindly, we support it through education. We believe in creating an educated community, and I think the government has done an excellent job. The Ministry of Health has done an excellent job in providing in terms of the scientific element. We saw it necessary to give the economic and financial element in terms of the impact of the pandemic on the economy, on our finances, so that it will help bring home the severity of this pandemic. The speed of vaccination deployment will determine how quickly we exit this crisis. We cannot continue when we have a few cases, there's a cluster to shut down the borders and shut down our economy. We cannot continue. This is not a sustainable model. Roll up your sleeves and get vaccinated. It's as simple as that. Roll up your sleeves and get vaccinated. NCBA supports the government of Anguilla, the vaccination drive. We support the Vax AXA. It's a national cause. It's not a government of Anguilla cause. It's a national cause. And that is why NCBA is donating to the cause. We've donated to the Ministry of Health 10 $500 vouchers towards opening gold savings accounts, all get at securing your future. So we put in those 500 into helping persons set up that emergency fund, setting up the required savings plan towards building their future. So we focus on wealth creation. So that $500 will not go towards spending, but it will go towards wealth creation. Thereafter, we'll encourage the persons who that win under this, basically win those prices, to continue to make monthly amounts towards building that safety net that is required. We encourage everyone who has not taken the first dose to come forward today and the rest of this week. We have a date of the end of the month for the first dose of the vaccine. Vaccinate for you, for me, and our economy. To combat, as I mentioned, this is we need a national approach. We need all hands on deck. We are dealing with a monster of a crisis. It requires collaborative and a national response. And I just repeating again, this is not a government of Anguilla or Ministry of Health issue. It is a national issue. It requires, again, a collaborative, it requires all hands to come forward. Today, that option for our tourism-dependent states is vaccination. Achieving a high level of virus immunity is critical to our survival. And so as an institution, we could not sit and allow the pandemic to destroy us. We have to treat with the virus like we've treated with every other virus in the past, through vaccination. In conclusion, COVID-19 continues to threaten the health and well-being of our people. What are our choices? If not vaccination, then what? I challenge each anti-vaxxers to come forward with a more workable and sustainable solution to combat this pandemic. Come forward and put down the solutions. How can we restart this economy? Provide the sustainable options that are available to Anguilla and the rest of the world. I got my COVID vaccine. I'm fully vaccinated. Friday last week was my 3 weeks, so I'm considered fully vaccinated. And I'm very proud of that decision. I did it for you, I did it for me, I did it for my kids at home because the children are unable to get vaccines today. And I did it for our economy as a whole. Let's bring back Anguilla together. Remember, more jabs means more jobs. Speeding up vaccine uptake is the best economic policy available to us today to boost growth and to create jobs for all of us, to improve our livelihood and our economic situation. I want to thank our listeners at this point. If we had our normal in-person session, I would be able to get questions from you and to respond to some of your questions. But I'm not sure if that is possible. But I want to take the opportunity to provide some special thanks to our ministry, our persons in the Ministry of Health, the CMO, our nurses, our doctors, our medical professionals, the government of Anguilla, the Premier and the Cabinet, the many corporate partners supporting this drive, and the people of Anguilla for supporting the vaccine drive. So I would like to say a hearty, thank you, because all of that decision will serve us well in a few months, where we can see some light at the end of the tunnel. I thank you.
Anguilla is our home. We've been here since the beginning. We are the only indigenous bank on the island. We are the pulse of our communities. We are the bank with a difference. Our commitment to building Anguilla means we value our relationships, friendships, homes, and businesses. Everything we do is done with care and expertise. We serve our people with integrity and pride, ensuring we transact with confidence. It's our passion to help our people and businesses succeed, making sure every Anguillan has the opportunity to flourish in a beautiful country we call our home. Welcome to the People's Bank. Welcome to the National Commercial Bank of Anguilla.